with the news dropping that Sam Darnold is the backup quarterback, Tom Pelissero said to us, it just kind of got rolled into the conversation, but he said, yes, Brandon Allen is going to be your QB3 and on the roster. And Trey Lance was not at practice today, and, quote, all options are on the table. The 49ers trying to figure out what's next, and most people think there's a trade coming. And then check this out. This from Dianna Rusinni, who just joined The Athletic earlier this week. And Dianna tweeted this just a few hours ago, and I think it again will add to the conversation if you would like to listen. There is a large contingent that doesn't want to do that. They just want to scream and yell and moan that everything is unfair. But if you want to actually listen, here is inside high-level NFL reporting. You can dismiss it if you want. Dianna says, while the 49ers are exploring trade possibilities for Trey Lance, the front office was shopping him for the entire offseason. The team never received a significant trade offer. So
never received a significant trade offer.
Right.
That leaves a little bit of wiggle room in terms of how you interpret a significant
maybe they
trade offer.
Maybe they were offered a 7 and they said no.
Or a 5th.
And maybe now they're like, actually, we'll take that 7.
Right. So I wonder what a significant offer would have been in terms of, obviously a significant offer would be, we want what we gave up to get Trey in the first place. That would be a significant offer. 2 firsts and a third. Doubt they got that. But I wonder if they got any offer other than, like you're saying, a 7th or a conditional 6th or something.
Silver reported today that a 5 was not offered. So it was lower than that, if anything. But, the second Sam Darnold was signed, to me, it never made sense, the idea that he would be coming to be a QB3. That's somebody who would have too many other options around the league. And so the more we're reading, the more reporting that is happening, and the more you just sort of focus on what the 49ers are actually doing. They were trying to get Trey Lance off the roster all off season. And it was probably to avoid this August sounding like this. I mean, think about what we've been through every day. These guys suit up, go out in the warmth of Santa Clara, practice, and then everybody loses their bananas based on practice stats. We've never done that before in our lives. Most people didn't even know that was a thing.
Right.
And now we've got Matty Miyoko tweeting in-depth breakdowns. This is how many reps he had. This is how many reps this guy had. Here's how many completions. Here's how many touchdowns. Here's how many interceptions. With no context ever in terms of like, well, what were they working on that play?
Right.
What were they trying to achieve on that play? And so we've all, listen, I'm not blaming anyone. I get why the fans are interested, and I get why we're talking about it, because we talk about what the fans are interested in. It's not anyone's fault but the 49ers for making this guy the number 3 overall pick. But that's about enough of that, is sort of from the way I read what the 49ers did today. That's about enough of that.
Right, and they did it on a day where Kyle Shanahan wasn't scheduled to talk and then didn't talk, and it's also in advance of a day where they're just going to walk through. It's on the day that was the last practice of training camp. Tomorrow's a walkthrough. Friday's the final preseason game. I'm sure you take Saturday off. Maybe you take Sunday off as well, and then you start preparation for Pittsburgh, a 2-week run-up to the first game of the regular season. So camp is over. Next Tuesday, you cut the roster down to 53, and then you really can start to ramp things up for the first game against Pittsburgh. So I think you look at the timing of it, and you realize exactly what you're thinking, Mark, in terms of enough is enough with all of this camp discussion about our QB depth chart. And we talked about it last week, or maybe it was the week before when you and I were both in the studio when it was the depth chart had the it was Sam Darnold or Trey Lance, or it was Trey Lance or Sam Darnold when the first unofficial depth chart came out. And that didn't, do anything to end the speculation about who the backup would be. And now there is no or. If the depth chart comes out, Sam Darnold is the 2 and Trey Lance is the 3 for now. And we'll see if that continues to be the case come Tuesday.
You want an even I don't know if I should say worse. You want a tweet from Dianna Rusinni that has even more thump? This came just 20 minutes ago. She wrote, just a thought on the value of Trey Lance then and now. Rand Carthon, many of you know, was with the 49ers, is now taken over as the GM for the Tennessee Titans. She says Rand Carthon, who was on the Niners staff when they drafted Trey, fast forward to this offseason, and Carthon took over as GM for a Titans team in the market for a young quarterback. The Titans completely passed on a trade for Lance. No interest. Carthon knew what San Francisco knew. That's her tweet.
Man, that is fairly damning, especially when you look at Tennessee's quarterback situation, which is not going to make anybody green with envy. And you can look at any of the other situations that involve former Niner staffers, Miami and the Jets. They have a couple of coaches who spent a lot of time here, the Houston Texans as well. And you haven't seen or heard any of those teams clamoring to get their hands on Trey Lance either.
Yeah, gosh. Let's hear from as many of you as possible as we rock into our 5 o'clock hour and remind you that you're listening to 95.7 The Game, KGMZ, FM, and HD1 San Francisco, always live on the free Odyssey app, Twitch, and YouTube, powered by First NorCal Credit Union. Really good chats on Twitch and YouTube today. Xfinity Mobile text line available to you as well. Thank you all so much for listening on a very, very big day, and we'll keep talking it out. Let's go to Jeff in Marin. Hey, Jeff, you're on with Willard and Dibs. What you doing?
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. So, first of all, I just saw this on Bleacher Report. Shanahan wants Lance on 49ers. He's really hoping Trey remains an option on the team heading into next season. So I thought I'd share that. Then, basically,
when did that come out, Jeff? When did he say that?
Just a few minutes ago.
No, but when did Kyle say that, Jeff? Because if he said that yesterday, that's totally different.
I just got that note coming up on Bleacher Report. But that's not what I was calling about. Basically, I agree with you, Mark, your analysis that, look, they had some concerns, and that's why they re-signed Jimmy. Here's an alternative analysis I think that could apply here, too. I think they saw in Purdy in practice that, hey, the kid's pretty good, and he beats out Sudfeld as he should have. But I don't think they really knew exactly what they had in him. And so they make Trey the starter. And what are they going to do? Go into the season with Mr. Irrelevant being the untested backup to Trey? No, it made sense to sign Garoppolo under those circumstances to be the veteran experienced backup to Trey. If Trey hadn't gotten hurt, how long would they have let him go? Maybe the whole season. I think what happened was when it finally got down to Purdy and Purdy got in the game, it was like, oh, my God, this kid's really got it, however you want to define it. And then he played so well, it was like, oh, my God, he's just way better than anything else we've got. And coming into this season, I could be way off base here, but they may think, look, he's a good kid. The team likes Trey. We still think he's got potential, but he doesn't have it yet, right? And I called into one of the earlier shows saying, especially after the Oakland game, it was like, look, after that Oakland game, he looked like a rookie quarterback who played minimally at a small college. The Denver game, he looked much better. I think we all have to agree upon that. But so you're in a situation now where you've got a young kid, Purdy, who's clearly got it, who's got to be the starter this year, and you've got Trey Lance, who's got potential to have it, but you know what? He's also really young. And how are you going to have those two guys on the same team? That really may set up an impossible dynamic, right? And so I'm not completely sold on Darnold. I think he looked better overall than Trey so far in the preseason, but I'm not sold on him either. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, appreciate it, man. I'll say
to
this.
me, the impossible dynamic is the next contract that you're facing. You're not going to give them both a second contract.
Right.
So
right.
To that extent, it is impossible long term.
Jeff and I see what happened with Garoppolo last year differently. This is well documented. We've discussed it a number of times. I think we're kind of playing we're playing in the flowers a little bit in fantasy land with the idea that the 49ers brought back Jimmy Garoppolo because that made sense as this steady Eddie veteran backup, and that's what they wanted. They brought him back because it was a hedge. They didn't like what they were seeing. And we've talked about this so many different ways. There's so much evidence. There's so much evidence that if you're still ignoring it, you got to ask yourself why. You got to ask yourself why. Every single move they've made since the second camp opened last August suggested that they are way short on confidence in Trey Lance. And I'd also just add this. When you are all in on a young quarterback, okay, when you're all in on somebody new, number 3 overall pick, the last thing on earth that you do to that player, and I remember saying this over and over last August, the last thing you do to that player is grab someone who has just been a successful starter on the same team and huck him into the room with you and just hang him over your shoulders so that the fan base can scream the second you have a bad game. You don't do it to the guy. It just flat out would not have made sense. The only reason you do it is if you look around your room and go, damn, we got an incredible roster in here, and I ain't really digging the way Trey Lance is playing, so we better be ready if he goes out there and doesn't win.
Or if he goes out there and gets hurt. And the way they went about using him indicated that they didn't have faith in him to go out there and throw the ball a ton, and so they thought the best way to win that game would be to run Trey Lance, and they did it with the knowledge that Jimmy Garoppolo was, to your point, hanging over him. And if they already love Brock Purdy, and the reports are they already love Brock Purdy, and they loved him enough to where they gave Nate Sudfeld $2 million guaranteed and then showed him the door. So you knew that you had Brock Purdy as well, a quarterback that you loved. And you had Jimmy Garoppolo, a quarterback with whom you had won the NFC before, and you'd been to conference championship games with before. So you had faith in Jimmy G. But to your point, if you fully believed in Trey Lance, without a shadow of a doubt, you probably wouldn't have brought back Jimmy Garoppolo, and you certainly would have gone about things a little bit differently going into that camp. And then this camp, even though Brock Purdy was injured and Trey Lance was finally healthy, you brought in Brandon Allen and Sam Darnold as a hedge, not only to Brock Purdy, but a hedge to Trey Lance as well.
I think this thing,
double hedge.
Yeah, I agreed. And I mean, this thing that we just read from Dianna Rusinni, I think this is, you called it more damning. I think it's the most damning thing we've seen yet. And it leads us down the road of the sentence that nobody wants to say. It's leading us down that road. I'm not a scout. I am not a quarterback expert. I look at a player, we've only seen 4 real games, some preseason games. I've been to practice a handful of times, and all of that adds up to what? I'm not an evaluator. So I don't know if this guy is going to be good someday. I don't know exactly how short of being good he is right now. I know it's not good enough. But what Rusinni is saying right here, I'll just put it in someone else's mind instead of mine. I'm not saying this, but what she's essentially saying is executives in the league who've watched him play don't think he can play. Do whatever you want with that. Well, that's what they think.
She also had this tweet that the Trey Lance market may be quiet for now. This past spring, the Niners and Vikings had serious conversations about a trade for Lance, but talks fell apart according to league sources. That was from 3 hours ago. So if that's the case and talks broke down, maybe talks can get restarted.
Start them up again.
Especially when you think about Minnesota and their situation. Kirk Cousins' contract gets voided next year. And if Minnesota has a little bit of a regressive year, and last year was an odd one where they won 10 games by 8 points or less. So if that doesn't go their way this year, maybe Minnesota misses out on the playoffs and they decide for a reboot with a local kid from Minnesota. That makes some sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And we've now heard the Vikings come from Rusinni. We've heard the Vikings come from Pelissero, who joined us earlier. If you missed that conversation, Odyssey app, YouTube, there's a lot of great information in there. And it came from Rap Sheet as well. All three of them within the last 4 hours have brought up the Minnesota Vikings. So to me, if I'm handicapping this, by Saturday he's in Minnesota. That would be my number one answer on the board in terms of what's probable here. So, yeah, it does make a lot of sense. But it's got to be a why not trade. That's the problem. Minnesota's got to be like, well, why not?
Yeah.
So they're not going to give up a bunch. They're not going to give up a bunch.
Well, their quarterback room consists of Nick Mullins, Jaron Hall, and Jordan Ta'amu. So you don't really have
Kirk Cousins.
Right. Well, Cousins.
But
obviously.
Cousins is going to be a free agent. Lance has got, as you said, the local tie. And why not take a look? If you're Minnesota and you're thinking, hey, there's a decent chance that next year we're going to be looking for a QB, right? Let's do something that's low risk and let's take a look. It's almost like a free audition. And if that works out, then amazing. And if not, then you don't pick up the 50-year option and off you go and do something different at quarterback.
Right.
Or if Cousins is amazing, you re-sign him and no harm, no foul.
But in terms of like backups, and you were saying yesterday or the day before about Sam Darnold, maybe the best backup quarterback in the league, and you look at Minnesota's backup situation, and Nick Mullins right now is your backup. That's not very good. If you fancy yourself as a good team, Minnesota does. If your quarterback gets hurt, you probably would be happier with Trey Lance than you are with Nick Mullins.
I don't know. I mean, Nick has at least played a bunch of games.
Sure.
Remember we talked about just what is experience. What's the value of experience in a backup?
Right.
Even if they're not dynamic. I think that's one of the good things about Sam Darnold. When people look at this and go, man, you're one hit away from Sam Darnold being your QB. Well, that's actually, I find that comforting. Not because Sam's great, but he's decidedly okay. He's not awful. I mean, the Vikings are one hit away from Nick Mullins being their quarterback. Sure. And the Chiefs are one hit away from none of you even know who their quarterback is. How many hits away are the Bills from Matt Barkley being their quarterback? I think we've slipped and fallen into a weird dynamic because of last year, which is that 49er fans think that you get to just you're allowed to just build this room where you can have two quarterback injuries and still win the Super Bowl. That's not how life works.
Not usually, no.
Not usually, if ever.
Well, now you have a team that has built itself around that very threat and that very idea, which is why you have four quarterbacks, all of whom have some level of credibility. And if Trey Lance does get traded, your QB3 is a guy who started games in the NFL. And you would take your QB3 up against most teams' QB3, and that's not an accident when you've got a Super Bowl-ready roster and a history of quarterback injuries.